from Luke 23:34, and Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And a Muslim apologist who studies textual criticism pointed out the reality, and this is a reality. If you grab hold of the Greek New Testaments back here, if you look at the Nession text, UBS text, any critical text whatsoever, you will find notation indicating a textual variant at this point. And so I simply addressed that and said that in light of the strength of the textual variant, this is something we need to keep in mind, and we need to be careful in our utilization of this text in light of the historical reality that early, very early manuscripts of the Gospel of Luke, including P75, which P75 and Vaticanus together do not contain that portion of the verse. And in light of the textual studies that have been done, we recognize that P75 and Vaticanus are related to one another, but they are not direct genealogical. They're not directly genealogically connected in the sense that B is not a copy of P75, but both of them go back to an earlier progenitor. It may have been the manuscript from which P75 was copied that then is maybe copied once or twice and then becomes the progenitor of B, or maybe only copied once. But the point is that the connection between P75 and Vaticanus is earlier than P75. So you can rather confidently state that that particular text, which does not contain that phrase, goes back to about 125. Maybe if you want to be really skeptical, 150, but that far back. It's very, very early. And so when you then recognize that Codex Bezecantabrigiensis, Codex D, the strange, weird, wonky progenitor of the weird, strange, wonky Western text, likewise does not have it. And with D, it's much more relevant in D if it doesn't have something than if it does, because D likes to add weird stuff. It's just all there is to it. How many steps Peter goes down after he's freed from jail? Okay, whatever. And then Codex Washingtonianus likewise does not contain this. And certain forms, the Syriac, Saharic, Bohairic, so in other words, foreign language translations, likewise not containing this. What that means is you must deal with the reality of the manuscripts. And to hide that reality is not an option for Christians. We are wide open with the textual data of the New Testament. We do not hide anything. And that must flow from an overarching commitment to want to know what was written by the original authors. There may be something interesting to gather from from later manuscripts and later variants, and you can start exegeting textual variants all you want, but the overarching drive must be for what was originally written. And this gives rise to all of what's going on today. I want to be commenting in the not too distant future on the new Tyndale Greek New Testament once I've got a chance to do any work with it. And I foresee there's going to be more and more conversation about what's called CBGM, the coherence-based genealogical method. The book of Acts in the Editio Critico Maiori was just released, 4 volumes. I don't have it in here. I have it in the other room. Very, very important in my current PhD studies, because finally I have some CBGM data in regards to P45, because P45 contains sections of Acts. And so one of my primary projects, once I finally get back from this last trip, well, I've got one shorter trip in December, but this is the last sort of many multi-day trips this year, is diving into that mountain of information found in the ECM volumes on Acts, 4 volumes on Acts. I foresee in the future some serious pushback against CBGM. I have a lot of questions about it. Supposed to tomorrow receive a new book going into depth in that. Guri and Wasserman have put out a book on that. So lots of work's being done in this area. This is an area of my studies. The individual who made these accusations, trying to tell people I don't have any basis talking about these things. Of course, this individual has no basis talking about these things, but that's another issue. So I am very much involved in that field, and I have a feeling there's going to be, a lot more discussion about this. Anyway, the point being, someone would say, well, you're giving ammunition to the enemy. Well, I've heard that many times whenever you get into any meaningful discussion about whether it be textual issues, canonical issues. I remember the first time I tried to explain to folks some of the canon issues, some of the process by which the canon developed over time. Oh, there were some people who were just like, you can't talk about that. That might trouble someone, or someone might use that against us, and things along these lines. And I'm like, where do you get this idea? If the faith is true, then there's nothing you need to hide and need to hide from. And if people are troubled to discover something that is truthful about the faith or the history of the Bible or the history of the canon, history of the church, there's a lot of folks don't think I should even address what I'm addressing in regards to Luther. Oh, don't talk about why Luther said the things he did about the Jews, or don't talk about Luther and Fritz Erba. Let's just celebrate Luther. And it's like, well, I don't want to celebrate a cartoon figure. And there's so much to be learned and benefited from by looking at where we can go, Luther was wrong here. Why was he wrong? In light of how brilliant he was, in light of how much God used him. If he could be so wrong here, what about us today? Oh, well, that's uncomfortable to people. People might use that against us. Well, you can't stop people from misusing truth. You just have to be careful you're speaking the truth. Let me repeat that. You can't stop people from misusing the truth. You just have to make sure you're speaking the truth. And if you're speaking the truth, if someone misuses it, they will be held accountable by God. You can't control that. And so I have seen cults and isms abuse the truth over and over and over again. That doesn't mean you stop speaking the truth. It doesn't mean you start trying to hide things from people. So, for example, in Luke 23:34, there is a major textual variant. And as a result, you should be very careful about making large theological points based upon what is truly a highly questionable text. Now, you say, well, that's helping the Muslims. No, it's not. That's true whether I say it or not. I mean, I'm just astounded that people would say, well, shh, don't talk about that. Let me give you some commentary. It's interesting. When Dr. Metzger comments on this in the Metzger textual commentary, he's very, very brief, very short in what he says. He says the absence of these words from such early and diverse witnesses as P75, BD, W, theta, two different forms of the Latin. It's too small for me to see what the letter there is, but a form of the Syriac, the Sahidic Coptic, and certain manuscripts of the Bohairic, and a few others, is most impressive and can scarcely be explained as a deliberate excision by copyists who, considering the fall of Jerusalem to be proof that God had not forgiven the Jews, could not allow it to appear that the prayer of Jesus had remained unanswered. At the same time, the Logion, though probably not a part of the original Gospel of Luke, bears self-evident tokens of its dominical origin, and was retained within double square brackets in its traditional place where it had been incorporated by unknown copyists relatively early in the transmission of the third gospel. So that's all Metzger says. He says it's very early, and when they use the term dominical origin, they're talking about the high probability that it actually does come from Jesus. Now, I have this on the screen too, but it's I have to keep scrolling so much, and my mouse thing here is a little loud, so I'm going to, since I have the printed edition, utilize the old-fashioned paper edition here. Now, this is the Comfort New Testament Text and Translation Commentary. We used to carry this. I think it's still in the Amazon bookstore, possibly, maybe. Right, Rich, who isn't listening to me right now? Yes, it is. Okay. Really great book to have. It looks great on your shelf, even if you can buy it in accordance and other things like that. He has a much longer commentary. And yet it's pretty much the same thing that I've said. And so for those who are saying, don't listen to guys, well, okay, don't if you don't want to. If you want to be biased and prejudiced and all the rest of the things that these people are. How about just listening to somebody else? The omission of these words, again, it's the Father forgive them, they know what they do, in early and diverse manuscripts, the earliest being P75, cannot be explained as a scribal blunder, but were the words purposely excised. Westcott and Hort considered willful excision to be absolutely unthinkable, but Marshall can think of several reasons why scribes might have deleted the words, the most convincing of which is that scribes might have been influenced by an anti-Jewish polemic, and therefore did not want the text saying that Jesus forgave the Jews who killed him. This would be especially true for Codex Bezae, D, whose scribe has been charged with having anti-Judaic tendencies. See Eldenep 1962, pages 51 through 62, if you'd like to look that up. However, there are 4 manuscripts of diverse traditions earlier than D, namely P75, BW, and a portion of the Latin manuscript tradition, which do not include these words. Thus, D could not have been the first to eliminate the words. The primary argument against excision on the basis of an anti-Judaic polemic is that Jesus was forgiving his Roman executioners, not the Jewish leaders. The grammar affirms this. In 23:3, it says, "Estaurosan auton," they, the Roman execution squad, crucified him. Then in 23:34, Jesus says, "Aphes autois," forgive them, i.e. the Roman execution squad. Furthermore, Jesus had already pronounced judgment on the Jewish leaders who would not believe in him, and even worse, who proclaimed that his works were empowered by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, Matthew 12:24 through 32. It is easier to explain that the words were not written by Luke, but were added later as early as the 2nd century, for it is attested by Hegesippus and the Diatessaron. If the words came from an oral tradition, many scholars are of the opinion that they are authentic. Indeed, Westcott and Hort considered these words in 22:43-44 to be, quote, the most precious among the remains of the evangelic tradition which were rescued from oblivion by the scribes of the 2nd century, end quote. Now listen, if you hear what they're saying there, they're saying these are later additions in the 2nd century, but they weren't part of the original. But they've been saved by insertion into 2nd century manuscripts of the New Testament at various places. But what if the words did not come from an oral tradition about Jesus' life and sayings? What would have inspired their inclusion? My guess is that the words were added to make Jesus the model for Christian martyrs of offering forgiveness to one's executioners. Whoever first added the words may have drawn from Acts 7:60, where Stephen forgives his executioners. Since Stephen's final words parallel Jesus' final utterances, it seemed appropriate to have Luke 23:34 emulate Acts 7:60. Or the words could have come from martyrdom stories, such as the account of the execution of James the Just, who is said to have forgiven his executioners. Thus, it can be imagined that church leaders told would-be martyrs to forgive their executors, not executors, because Jesus had done the same. Contrary to the external evidence with good and contrary to the external evidence and good internal arguments. The words appear in 3 Greek editions, the TR, the Westcott Hort, and the Nestle United Bible Society. And in all English translations, because they have become so much a part of the traditional gospel text, that editors of Greek text and Bible translators alike are not willing to excise this classic statement from their text. The first known person to excise the sentence from the text was the first Iarthotas of Codex Sinaiticus, Corrector 1, who worked on the manuscript before it left the scriptorium. Evidently, this Diorthotes used a different exemplar, which must have antedated the 4th century, that did not have these words. A second corrector, several centuries later, expunged the first corrector's deletion marks. Westcott Hort, Nestle, all in Nestle United Bible Society, double bracketed this text to show their strong doubts about its inclusion. All English versions include it, and all, with the exception of KJV, which does not have marginal notes, have marginal notes about its omission in various manuscripts. So, here's the question. Was Dr. Comfort giving ammunition to the enemy? Should he have been quiet about that? Not said anything about it? My critics, there's much to be critical about me about, but sometimes what we find out when we listen to our critics is that they have some really foundational epistemological problems and some foundational issues in regards to consistency and apologetic methodology. No, you don't hide this information. You hit it head on. And you then seek to be consistent in handling every other text where you have similar issues, whether it's the woman taken in adultery, longer ending of Mark, issues along those lines. You do not hide anything. That's not how the Christian faith should work.